I always like it when somebody in the Facebook group asks a question that I hadn't considered before to throw it in the group and ask around. So it was fun when Patrick asked a question about just some basics of travel security. He gave an example of being in Egypt and basically got him started. How do you prepare without getting totally paranoid? What do you keep in mind when traveling? We got a lot of answers, got really good answers, and I weighed in a little bit, but I wanted to discuss it a little bit more now on the podcast because it's a question I get often, and I always find it very difficult to answer because there's just so many ways you can go with that one. Um, Alan, he mentioned strategic environment tactics and strategic awareness tactics, which is just a really good point, which is very helpful and very, I would say unhelpful, but a starting point at the same time, meaning that those two concepts in and of themselves, you can spend a long time exploring those, just starting to try to wrap your head around everything that entails. It's going to take a long while, but it's a good starting point for somebody asking about, just the basics. Well, start there and work your way through everything that entails. So that was pretty good. Um, Wayland mentioned a really good point, and that is pickpockets and scammers are the biggest problems for travelers. I agree with that. The vast majority of places that I went to, and I've traveled almost all continents in the last 50 years, um, wherever there's tourists, the pickpockets and the scammers are there. And they get to be quite not necessarily sophisticated, but if you're not really up to speed as to how these types of criminals act or scam artists, then it's very easy to fall into the trap. There's a video somewhere online, and if I can find it, I'll put it in the show notes. But it's how pickpockets or this group of thieves basically steals your phone. There's 4 or 5 guys. It's a busy street. You're walking around on the phone with somebody, and they come at you from two directions at the same time. There's a guy from behind you who basically grabs your phone, immediately passes it on to somebody else, who then passes it on to somebody else as well, and you never really get to see who the first guy was. So while you're looking around confused and ready to just do something, yeah, but who do you pick? Because there's dozens of people. It's a busy street, and it's over in a second. So that is what I think is one of the key things is just being aware of that. Just pickpockets and all the scams that exist, whether it's trying to trying to help, quote unquote, you with your luggage as you come out of the airport, and then they have, they're like, and that'll be $10 or something along those lines. To in Paris, all those art shops. I think it was in um, where was it again? I forget the street. Saint-Germain-des-Prés. I think it was kind of the artist area back in the day. I don't know if it still is. I think so, but it's been a while since I've been to Paris. Um, where you're supposedly buying art, but it's just bullshit. It's just cheap stuff that is made in China, and that is sold to you an enormously hiked up price. And that's just two. There's dozens of those kind of things happening all the time, all over the world, not just in Europe, but in Asia and elsewhere, and so on. When I was in China in the early 90s, I mean, the guide, obviously he had to, but he took us to all the party shops, basically, government shops. Like, okay, buy here, and it was always the same thing that was on sale. And it was very early on in China, basically slowly making that conversion into a more, I wouldn't even call it capitalist way of organizing society, but individuals were allowed to start setting up small shops selling crap, basically selling Mao hats and red stars and Chinese flags and stuff. So everybody was trying to sell you that, especially if they saw that you were a white guy like me. Like they beelined towards us and like, hey, buy this stuff. in Chinese then, obviously. But this is something that you have to be aware of. Some people get upset when there's a scammer, and if you get upset, for you that may be the first time that you encounter this. For them, handling upset people is not uncommon. They know how to handle you. They're not alone. Typically, there's the people you see, there's the people watching the game that they're trying to use to rip you off and getting ready to intervene. So be careful. It's an easy way to get into trouble when you travel. Um, Let me see what else we have there. Um, Dan Phillip, he mentioned something that I think is important. Says you you can go for preparation, just checking out government travel advisory in advance, because they're a good starting point, and to give you some ideas as to what you have to watch out for that go beyond. Be careful when you leave the hotel. I agree with that. It's a good place to start. But sometimes don't leave the hotel is the best advice you can get. I went to Moscow for a competition. Really back in the 90s, that was about the time that Boris Yeltsin came to power. It was a very difficult time back then. Lots of violence, lots of poverty, like third world poverty. Um, and the people at the hotel implored us to not go out of the hotel once the night sets in. After dark, stay inside because we won't see you again. That's how desperate people were. And this is one of those issues that if you don't travel often to foreign countries, not within your own country, but to other countries, it's very difficult to understand that you don't blend in as much as you think you do, even if you make a conscious effort to try and blend in. It's a million small things that will give you away. It's the same thing when somebody comes to your area, your city, your town, whatever, and they try to fit in, but they're from whatever country, from a different country, continent that you can imagine, and you just spot it right away. The way they walk, the way they talk, the way they look at things, what they do, what they don't do, and so on. All these little things that just are not something you can pick up unless you live for a long time in a place, or if you're born there. Even sometimes it's just too difficult to learn, and that is something that is hard to understand unless you experience it. People just by looking at you know that you're not from there, which potentially makes you a target. So understanding that's reality, understanding that, then you have to understand where you are. You can go to really dangerous places and be fine if you understand this and know how to handle it. But if it's your first time traveling, I would suggest maybe start with something easier, something less adventurous. Start maybe by going to some place where it's not that difficult to see who are the good and the bad guys, and work your way up to whatever adventures you want to have um, as you get more experience. But sometimes, you know, it's not going out of the hotel is the main thing. It's like the best safety advice that you can get. Um, Dan mentioned the book, and I mentioned this as well. It's from Greg Ellifritz, a great book, Choose Adventure, Safe Travel in Dangerous Places. It's, in my opinion, one of the best books for travel safety. Not just travel safety, but I would add survival and mindset. Because Greg is a retired police officer. He runs active response training, if I'm not mistaken, is the name of his site. The Friday Knowledge Dumps, if you've watched them, if you follow those, that's him. It's his book, and it's just an amazing book. Just hundreds of little tidbits of advice, little tips, little hacks, tricks, and so on for when you're traveling. So I'll link to that book in the show notes where you can get it. I would very much advise anybody who is going to travel and you're like, I'm not quite sure if if I'll be able to manage my safety there without some preparation, read the book first. If you're going to, it doesn't have to be a dangerous place per se, but just a place where it's it's not like home. But we'll start there. Do you have to implement every little tip in the book? No, of course not. Use common sense. But at the very least, you have some, again, you have some thoughts and some ideas and some tools available to you as you prepare for the trip and when you're there. So I would very much recommend getting that one. Let me see which ones that that I also mentioned. Well, Craig mentions, do your research before you go. You said what I just said, blending in with the locals isn't always going to be possible, but try not to look like a tourist. And I mentioned that. Again, I was in Beijing in 1991. We were at Tiananmen Square, where the student revolt was basically squashed with the tanks rolling over people and so on. It was much more horrifying than that, actually. If you look that up, you'll find that it was a very, very bad time. Lots of casualties. So we visited that, and this old Chinese man walks up to me, and he thought I was a Russian, so he says Russian to me. And I said no, a Belgian in Chinese, Pili Shuren. So he got very confused at that point. He was looking at me like, what? and then he walked away. And the whole thing is that my point that I wanted to make is that as soon as you're spotted as a foreigner, somebody who is visiting, whether it's tourism or for whatever reason, but you're not a local, people will have certain expectations and stereotypes, good or bad. Doesn't matter which one it is. So, and it also doesn't matter if these stereotypes are accurate, but they will most likely treat you accordingly, or you will have an additional buffer, a margin of error for making a social faux pas or doing something stupid. Or you might have less of a margin of error because they've had, quote unquote, your kind there one too many times. So it all depends. Now, I understand that is not immediately helpful because it's two opposite ends of the scale. Well, yes, welcome to life. Welcome to life on this planet where nothing is easy or simple. It's always complicated and nuanced. And the same thing is true for safety advice. Right, that's it. So I'll put a link to the stuff that I said in the show notes. I'll also put a link to the posts in the Facebook group. My Facebook group is called Aries, God of War, aka not you. You are not Aries. Why? Because not everybody is the God of War. Nobody knows everything about violence. Doesn't matter how good you are at it, how much experience you have, you don't know everything. So that is the baseline. And if you want to join, you're welcome to join. Here's the thing. I've been getting a bunch of people join the last few weeks. That's awesome. However, understand, I also had to turn away a bunch of people. When you join, you get asked to read and agree to the rules of the Facebook group. A lot of people just click let me in and never click on the I agree button, let alone that they read them. I just put somebody in the penalty box for a month for breaking the rules. I've been online for many, many years, for decades actually. I've seen many groups and discussion forums come and go, some really big ones, because of the behavior of people. People are people online, but in the real world, it's the same thing. So we gotta have some rules. And I am basically, the image I use is Crom from the old Conan the Barbarian movies, the old god sitting on his throne. Don't make me get off my throne, is the joke that we have in the group. So if you want to join, you're more than welcome. However, gotta agree to the rules first. Otherwise, I'm just gonna say nope, you can't get in. Right, that's it. What's up next week? I had a really great interview with Barry Eisler. Barry Eisler, the New York Times bestselling author of the John Rain series and more, Live You Alone, as well. Great books, good friend of mine, and we talked about the differences between violence in real life and in fiction, TV, books, movies, and so on, and why that is the case. So from his perspective as a writer and from my perspective as an instructor, like why is there such a disconnect? And the reason I wanted to do that podcast was, well, I'm always complaining that people have these unrealistic ideas of violence because of movies and TV shows. But why would that be? And that's what we explore in that talk. There will also be a bonus episode on Patreon for that one, where we cover some more questions, and I start cursing, obviously. So that is coming up next week. In the meantime, everybody, thanks for listening. Take care and talk to you next time.